Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. I'm Chris Riley with System Source, joined by Dennis Kloster, one of our senior consultants from System Source. And we'll be digging into all the things that Broadcom has changed that's affected the pricing for VMware, which has, as a result, really affected what people want to do with continuing VMware, what alternatives they want to go with, because of the massive price increases really changed the whole economics of utilizing VMware. So we'll dig into that. We have lots of good information for you. So let's get going. So on the agenda will be a few introductory remarks that I'll be doing, and then Dennis will be really explaining what some of those changes have been. There is a free VMware version for small setups, and Dennis will talk about that. And if that's a good fit for you, that's a really a great fit for you probably. And then we'll go into other alternatives and looking at what those are, and then we'll save Q&A to the end. I'll talk about that just a little in a moment. So first of all, hopefully if you've asked for a pizza, you have a pizza in front of you and you're enjoying that pizza. But if not, just jot down Julie Dellinger's email address, which is on the screen, and you can email her if it doesn't show up here in a few minutes. Give the driver just a few minutes to find your address, whether you're working at home or from your office. All right, a little bit of housekeeping during the presentation. The audio is in presentation mode, so you'll be able to hear us, but sadly we can't hear you. Well, we do that so any music on hold, background noise where participants are, don't come through to the whole group. But as I mentioned, you can reach me at any point for Q&A just by dropping your questions into the questions tab. We'll save those up to the end and then allow Dennis to respond to those after the presentation itself. You can also reach me at any point through the chat tab, and I'll be happy to respond through that as well. Presentation and the recording will be made available after today's session, so look for that. And then finally, there is an evaluation that will come after today's session. Just take a moment to let us know how we did. We pay close attention to that so we can make it better, as well as there's some just kind of additional resources that are offered, which you might find helpful as you continue to plan and determine what you want to do regarding VMware. All right, just a little bit about System Source briefly. For those that may be new, we want to welcome new folks as well as our old friends here. So System Source, we've been around since 1981. There's about 75 of us here, and we work with IT professionals from South Central Pennsylvania, all through Maryland, down into the Washington, D.C. area. So most of our work is done in the data center, although we do some end-user computing work. In the data center, we're going to be operating both the traditional on-prem data center, as well as all of its various cloud and other location variants. So looking at obviously heavily into Microsoft Azure as well as Amazon Web Services, but regardless of where you put your computing resources, could be at colo facilities, could be at our facility, could be any number of places, including your own data center, we can help you kind of design compute, storage, all the security that goes with that, wireless, all the heavy security. We can help design, implement, and troubleshoot and support those kinds of things for you. But people buy equipment and software because they need to improve something. So we touched a little bit on consulting and cloud services. Training is where obviously we help get folks up to speed on the latest technologies. And that's usually in about 600 or 700 plus courses offered at any one point, all available remotely as well as at our facility. And that's going to be in about 36 different topic areas or manufacturer areas. So there may be, in-depth, manufacturer training, for example, Microsoft, but there's also be general things like security, not manufacturer specific. And you can delve into those right there on our website. Present is professional AV. Think all the WebEx rooms, Teams rooms, huddle spaces, conference spaces, auditoriums, even stadiums that we've done. So it's going to be all the large monitors, projectors, sound masking systems. Be looking at microphone systems, speaker systems, and that can be from built in all the way through just kind of portable types of systems, including digital signage as well. And then finally, we maintain all these things. Either you call us when things go bump under service and support on a reactive model, including 7x24 after hours, just follow the voice mail or the voice prompts, or as a proactive basis, which is under managed services, where we are the IT department for dozens of organizations. And then we do have one additional upcoming webinar this month, and that's going to be next week on managed IT services. And whether you have it or whether you're thinking about it, we're going to really digging in to say what are some of the specific results you should expect by going into a managed services arrangement. That may help you to kind of evaluate or better manage your current vendor, or to say, how would I do so if I went into it with a new vendor, including a system source. So that's coming up next month. And of course, we'll have a new slate of events coming up starting shortly for July and for June. And with that, let me go ahead and hand things over to Dennis, please.
All right, thanks, Chris. So I guess the first thing to talk about is why we're actually having this conversation. Why is everybody sitting virtually, I guess, in this webinar listening to me speak? So Broadcom purchased VMware a few years ago, and they've made a bunch of changes that I think most people would agree are not company friendly, meaning your company. So first they raised the price almost immediately. And then what they did was they switched from a perpetual license to a subscription-based model. So basically you used to own the license, and now it's more of the, what I always call like the Netflix model. You know, Broadcom looked around and said, gee, predictable reoccurring revenue. Boy, that sounds good. Let's go that way. And so they switched your licensing from you own it to you lease it or you rent it, or subscription based, however you want to look at it. And then the next thing they did is they said, we have too many product offerings out there, and we're going to eliminate some of them. And the ones that they chose to eliminate were the ones that were the most common and the most cost effective. And quite honestly, for most, and when I say most, I'm talking the 90-something%, I would bet, of our customer base, of what they were using was Essentials Plus, or in some cases Essentials, but it was the 3 ESXi server along with vCenter bundle, and it gave you a vMotion and DRS, or I'm sorry, not DRS, HA, and it gave you a whole bunch of functionality, and it was really, really reasonably priced. It was, I want to say it was $3,500 or $4,000, and again, that was a perpetual license, so your support was a couple $100 a month. Then the next thing they did after doing that is they said, let's increase CPU core requirements. And why that became a really big deal is the pricing shot up astronomically. So first they said, okay, you no longer own it, it's subscription based, you have to pay the same price basically yearly. Then they got rid of the most cost effective product bundles. Then they increased the CPU core requirements, which meant you need to buy more license. Then they came down and said, we're not willing to negotiate really on anything. You can tell us a sob story, you can tell us you're a nonprofit, you can tell us whatever it is you want to tell us, we really don't care. And when I say massive increases, these numbers are, pretty much almost all clients have seen 500+%. And the 500+% is more of the clients that were already in the enterprise market space. So they were not using the Essentials Plus and the SMB. Some as high as 1,400%. We've actually seen way higher than that lately. So you're talking, your cost may have been raised, 15 to 20x. I believe the last time we looked into this, the cheapest way to have a licensed version of VMware, I want to say it was around $13,000 to $14,000 a year. That is the lowest get out the door way to do it. And that is really expensive compared to what it used to be. So needless to say, people started looking for VMware alternatives. So if you're looking to, you say, okay, you get this massive, this massive bill from VMware. And when we talk about them not being willing to negotiate, one of the things they're not willing to negotiate on is the deadline. So if your deadline is, let's say you have to renew by, I don't know, June 2nd, and you're like, hey, like we need a week or 2 weeks or a month or whatever, they're not willing to negotiate on that either. You literally have to, they'll give you a cease and desist. You have to sign a legal document saying that you're no longer running their servers. I mean, it's scary, like the way that they're coming down on people, quite honestly. So needless to say, we've got, people starting to look around and go, okay, like we can't afford this, or we're choosing not to pay this. What other options are there? So the first thing is, to look at other on-prem hypervisor options. And that's probably the easiest way to go, because while you're changing the underlying hypervisor, whether it be Microsoft or an HPE or something else, it's not a massive change like moving to the cloud, which is probably something that's not realistic to do in the matter of a couple of weeks if you don't already have a cloud presence. So if you're going to be migrating to an on-prem solution, obviously you're going to need to have some additional server hardware and some additional storage. If you're lucky and you were following VMware's best practices and you had, let's say you have a 3-node ESXi cluster, you hopefully were not running all of your nodes at 80, 90, 100% utilization. So one of the ways that we can do this is, assuming all your nodes are at 50% or less utilization, and maybe you can handle a tiny performance hit for a couple days, is we would migrate the VMs off of one of your hosts and pull the host out of the cluster and then rebuild it on whatever on-prem hypervisor solution we go to. That's a way that you don't need to have additional server hardware. We can just kind of do like a swing migration. So that would be a kind of the perfect solution. But again, you also have to have additional storage temporarily, because the file format of your VMware infrastructure is going to be different than whatever you choose. And what I mean by that is, in most cases, people are looking at Hyper-V. There are other options that I'll talk about, but for on-prem, most people look at Hyper-V. And let's just pretend you had an 8 terabyte file server in VMware. For short term, you would need to have 16 terabytes available to do that, because there's going to be, basically a process. There's tools out there and that would, convert your VMware infrastructure. So you're, in the VMware world, we're talking about VMDK files most likely, and we're going to migrate them over to, in this case, Hyper-V's VH or VHDX files. And so you will short-term need, in this case, for an 8 terabyte file server migration, you would need to have 16 terabytes. So there are some things to think about. And then additional management software licensing. So again, just for talking Hyper-V, so you will need some additional Microsoft licensing, most likely. It is, in most cases, significantly cheaper to add Microsoft licensing to have a new Hyper-V cluster than it is to, renew your VMware licensing. And then if it's Hyper-V, it is another Windows server to manage. So everything that goes along with your Windows servers, your domain controllers, your file servers, you kind of have to do with Hyper-V as well. So, hey, we need to think about antivirus. We need to think about, are there security, agents? Are we doing, whatever, some type of third-party software? Are we using some type of management software? Are we using Ninja or something like that to, manage our Windows servers? So there is some additional thoughts that, because it's, in this case, we're talking about Hyper-V, that you probably would not have being installed on ESXi servers. Okay, what if we stick with ESXi and we just choose not to pay them? That is an option. So VMware always had this free ESXi software available. Broadcom, when they purchased VMware, initially took it away. couple of months ago, I want to say it was, well, I guess it's getting close to a year now, they brought it back. So it is an option to say, you know what, I'm not paying for the licensed version of VMware because I'm not paying a minimum $14,000 a year. I'm going to go with this free version. Here are the limitations. And we do have customers that are clients that this is the decision they made, but there are some limitations. So number one, there's no technical support at all available, other than calling System Source or somebody like us. I will say Broadcom does not offer their own technical support at all for any of their VMware related products. So if you have a licensed version, that minimum $14,000 version, licensed version of a VMware of vSphere, Broadcom is not actually the company providing the technical support. It is now up to the distributors. So just kind of keep that in mind. And here's kind of some of the big ones. So the backup API is not available with the free version. What that means is if you want to back your VMs up that are running on the free version of ESXi, you have to stick agents in them. So we're kind of going like backup exec days from 15 years ago. So there's no VMDK level backups. Migration tools will not work. So the migration tools, what I'm talking about is let's say you decide I'm going to run the free version for a year and then I'll migrate to to Hyper-V. The migration tools that are used to migrate from VMware to Hyper-V or to Azure or to whatever rely on an API that is closed with the free version. So that's not going to work. There are some workarounds with that, but it's not as clean. This is patching updates could be an issue, and it turns out it's a huge issue. So the way that the free version works, I'll talk about this in a second, I believe the next slide. And it says VMware or Broadcom could flip the script at any time. And what that means is they could take the free version away at any time. They've taken it away once. My guess is if people actually start doing this to save money and they find out that they're running it in production, they're going to take it away. The patching updates could be an issue. Why it works is, or I'm sorry, why it is it says you need to install the free version over your existing version. An upgrade will not overwrite the license key. But the free version is a separate download. Okay, so it is a separate download that has basically a do not ask for a license key baked into the software. Because of that, whatever version you download, meaning the build number, the patch number, that's what you have. And there is no way to patch it until Broadcom decides they're going to update the free version available for download. And they've yet to do that, not even one time since they've released the software. So if you choose to go this way, you are downloading a free version that cannot be patched, and the build number roughly matches where the build numbers were for the paid version from August of 2025. So you're basically right now already going, like 9 months behind? And obviously there have been a lot of software security updates in the past 9 months. We've had a couple of clients think this was a good idea, and then they run some type of security software that checks and says, are you up to compliance, basically, and all of a sudden it became a major issue where now we're looking to migrate away because there's no way to stay up to date with security patches. Anyway, so if you're looking at doing this process, I put you need to install over your existing version. If you just do an upgrade, it will not overwrite the license key and you're in the same boat. It does keep your VMFS data stores, so it's not going to overwrite all of your existing data with your virtual machines. However, it will come up like it is a brand new ESXi install. So you'll have to set up all the network settings again. So just document your existing ESXi server network settings, and then document where your VMs are. Because while it keeps the VMFS data stores, the VMs will not be registered. So you'll have to go through and browse the VMFS data stores and register your VMs into ESXi and then power them on. The VMs themselves should keep all of their network information, so you don't have to worry about redoing that. The whole process, depending on how how much memory and the hardware and stuff like that, but this whole process, not counting the documenting and not counting the registering all the VMs, because obviously there's a time difference if you have 5 of them versus 50, but it might take 1 to 2 hours, if that. Okay, next thing to talk about is, all right, let's just take a look at Azure. For most of what I'm about to say, you can substitute the word Azure for AWS or whatever your favorite public cloud vendor is. We talk a lot about Azure because really since kind of COVID, I guess, is when I noticed a huge change where people stopped going to AWS and started going to Azure. I think a lot of it was people had existing, pretty much everybody at this point, or pretty much most clients, are running Office 365, so they already had a presence in Azure. So it was just kind of when it came time to migrate your data or your VMs, just made more sense. So again, a lot of what I'm talking about, it says Azure, but it's relatable to any cloud provider. Okay, so different ways to do this. Number one is we build new and migrate data and apps. So we're basically going to say, okay, on our ESXi servers that we're trying to get rid of because they're so expensive, we have 10 virtual machines, and we're going to go into Azure and we're going to build, I don't know, let's pretend we're not going to consolidate. We'll build 10 new VMs, and we're going to migrate the data from each of the VMs one by one, and the apps and domain controller and all that stuff. Or we could say, hey, I don't need 10 VMs. I'm only going to build 5 new, and I'm going to consolidate. The biggest benefit to doing it this way is that you're going to come out with net new. So if your servers right now on your ESXi servers, your virtual machines, let's say they're running, God forbid, 2016, 2012, 2019, something like that, you could rebuild them new 2022, 2025. You could install the newest version of the apps. This does take more time, more planning. Typically, you're going to see more issues just because of just migrating data and installing new applications and stuff. So there's just inherently more potential pitfalls. And then Azure Migrate is a tool that is used for as-is migration. So if anybody remembers back in the old, when we were all physical servers and VMware was a new thing and we had the P2V tools, that's essentially what Azure Migrate is. It is a let's migrate from a source that is not Azure, in this case VMware, to Azure. And then the last tool that's out there is Site Recovery, which is an Azure tool. It's primarily a disaster recovery tool. So let's pretend you wanted to keep your VMware VMs, but you wanted to replicate the VMs up into Azure as a disaster recovery site. So Site Recovery uses replication, and you could use the Site Recovery instead of DR, but as a way to replicate your data up into Azure, and then power the VMs off in production and just go to moving your VMs now into Azure as production VMs. Okay, so Azure Migrate, the source can either be, it's basically the big 3, VMware, Hyper-V, or physical servers. It has 4 steps, and I'm going to go through this relatively quickly because I have slides for each one of these. So discover is basically, what do I have out there? What virtual machines are available, or physical servers? Assess, we're going to take a look at them, at what we found in the discover phase. We're going to see other changes that we should make, recommendations. Hey, this thing probably should have more RAM. This thing doesn't need to have 12 CPUs or 16 CPUs. Then we're going to replicate it up to Azure. Then once replication is successful, we can test the migration. And then if this migration is successful, we can actually do the actual cutover migration. The discovery and assessment tool, so basically, as I said, goes out and discovers what's available and then looks at it. So it'll find what you have available. It will then convert those. When I say convert, I'm talking about like in an Excel spreadsheet or something like that. And it'll say, okay, this VM in the VMware world has 4 virtual CPUs and 16 gigs of RAM, and it's got this amount of disks and blah 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 blah. In the Azure world, that is an Azure D3S whatever, and here's what it looks like in Azure, and here's what the cost would be. So it's actually really, really cool, because one of the biggest things that people ask when we start talking about doing cloud migrations is this going to save me money? How much money is this going to save me? And migrations to the cloud and cloud calculators and all that type of stuff, they're it's a nice ballpark estimate, but until you actually do the migration, it's really difficult to know the exact cost. But this does a nice job of giving you a nice ballpark pricing. So the discovery uses a lightweight Azure Migrate appliance. You would basically install the Azure Migrate appliance into your VMware cluster. It can run on a physical server, but typically we're talking about on a VM. It discovers your on-prem servers. It sends constant metadata to Azure Migrate. It's agentless. You don't need to install anything on your discovered servers. It's really, really slick. You can also import a CSV file. I'm not sure why anybody would do that though, because the appliance is really easy to set up and it does find everything. And then what you're going to do is you're going to go into Azure and you're going to create a project. And you're going to download and install the OVA, which is the file for the migration appliance. You'll configure and register the appliance, which again is very straightforward to do. You're registering it basically so that your Azure account associates the appliance with your account. And then you set up a continuous discovery. So it goes out and finds, in most cases, there's not that many, most people aren't doing that many changes. So the continuous discovery may not actually even be necessary. What you find on the first discover is probably all you're going to have. But it is nice if you're planning on doing this, hey, this is going to be a 6-month project, and 2 months into it, somebody starts creating more VMs. It's going to pick those VMs and alert you, hey, this has changed, the cost has changed, the way the project looks has changed, and so forth. Then it's going to do an assessment. So it's going to look at, is this a cloud ready VM? Are there issues that, hey, we probably shouldn't move this to the cloud? You need to do this, this, and this first. And then, as I said, it's going to estimate the cost, the potential complexity of the migration. It's going to do an assessment and say, like, how risky is this? You review the results. What's nice is you see right here, it's very KPI kind of looking, right? So it's, hey, this is red, this is green, this is, you can just kind of look at a really high level and then dig really deep if you choose to. So very, very simple to use. And then this is the really cool part. If you look here, it says, in this case, we found 442 servers. We put them into 2 different groups. We ran 2 assessments. Let's go ahead. We're happy. Let's say in the 2 groups, we have a group that we're not replicating it and then a group that we are. We go ahead, we click the replicate button. Maybe it takes, I don't know, a couple days, couple weeks, couple hours, depending on what we're replicating. Once we see that replication has been successful and the VMs have all had their data synced up to Azure, we have the ability to, I talked a little too much, let me catch up here. So here's all our replication stuff. We have to obviously pick network, subnets, all of that stuff. It's all, anything you're used to doing with Azure when creating new VMs, you're going to be doing this with this Azure Migrate tool as well. We see here we have 58 discovered servers. We have 1 replicating. We haven't tested or migrated anything. Now let's say we have gone ahead, our VMs have replicated. Now we can do a test migration. Okay, before I hit the cutover button, let's bring this VM up, and let's see, can we access it? Does it, does it look the same way? Does it Can the end users access it the same way? If not, we dump the test migration, and it kind of just goes back to where it was before we started it. So there's no changes to the data, and then we can troubleshoot and figure out why didn't that work as expected. If the test goes well, then obviously the next step is we actually migrate, which is our cutover. So very, very cool utility. It says the most migrations will use the build new and migrate or use Azure. There are third-party tools. There's tons of them out there, and I mean tons of third-party tools out there. All right, I'm going to go over to really high level what Microsoft services are available specifically in Azure. So when we start talking about infrastructure as a service, this is where most of what we're talking about now is, because we're talking about virtual machines, we're talking about storage, and we're talking about networking. So all of that is the infrastructure as a service. Platform as a service is, instead of running, hey, so let's say I have a SQL server that's only running one database, okay, on-prem in a virtual machine, a VMware virtual machine. I can run, instead of doing the let's move that database onto a virtual machine in Azure, I can use the platform as a service, which is a hosted SQL app service, and pay for the database instead of the Windows licensing and the CPU and the memory and the networking and the hard drive space and the SQL license and the Windows license and blah, 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 blah. I can just pay for the SQL platform service. Same thing with Azure Files. I can move my file shares directly into Azure Files as opposed to on a virtual machine that's a file server. And then obviously we have as software as a service, we have Microsoft 365, which I assume most people are probably already running. Probably the biggest benefit to, in this case, Azure, but essentially any cloud provider, is that they have data centers all over the world. So 60 plus Azure regions, 300 plus data centers. This is probably an old slide, so I would not be surprised if it's, the numbers are doubled by now. So why consider Azure? So the first is, what makes more sense to you, capital expense or operating operating expense, CapEx or OpEx? So instead of making a big, huge purchase every 3 to 5 years where I'm buying new servers, I'm buying new storage, I'm buying new switches, I'm going to break that out into across a monthly cost. Savings, question mark, maybe. And this is the big one. Everybody always asks us, matter of fact, I was on a call yesterday, we were talking with a customer of ours about Azure, and they said, is this going to save us money? We said, I don't know, because there really is no way to know until we get really, really into it and start really digging into your virtual machines and really coming up with a plan. And then we can come up with somewhat of an idea. I will say, if you go into this thinking you're going to save a whole bunch of money, and you're not planning on buying hardware, so if you are planning on, gee, my VMware bill just came due, and I was planning on doing a hardware refresh right now, yeah, Azure will probably come cheaper. If you were not planning on buying hardware in the next couple of years, and let's say you run your hardware every 5 to 7 years instead of every 3 to 4 years, your hardware refresh, it may not be as big a savings as you'd like. Latest technologies and up-to-date version. So once you go into Azure, you pretty much always have the latest technologies and up-to-date versions available to you, whether it's the software or on the back-end piece. Supports mobile and geographically separated workforces. Integration with cloud and on-prem services, so your end users can really be anywhere. There's very simple to set up gateway and VPN appliances that can connect Azure to your home, or I'm sorry, your office, which if your end users are already connecting from your office remotely, they can connect through that way as well. And then the biggest benefit of the cloud in general is just flexibility. You can scale up, scale down very, very quickly. You can add VMs short term, pull them back, it's that ability to just on a sliding scale, just scale up, scale down, without having to really make a lot of planning. It just comes down to, paying for it. Okay, so resiliency, I'll just say this, you kind of get what you pay for in the next, what I'm talking about now. So for resiliency, you can choose to have your virtual machines available in multiple data centers, across zones, across geographic locations, meaning other countries. So the amount of copies of your data, the amount of copies of your servers really is, I don't want to say infinite, but the ability to have extremely high availability, extreme fault tolerance is very, very easy with Azure Cloud Provider. It just comes down to the cost. So with storage, we have locally redundant storage, which is in the same data center. We have multiple copies. Then we have zone redundant storage, which is across multiple zones. Inside of multiple availability zones, which is data centers in a zone. And then we have geo-redundant storage, which is now we're doing geo-replication from somewhere to, somewhere maybe half across the world. For migration, the migrate as is or build new. So this was what I talked about at the very beginning. There is no right or wrong answer. A lot of it comes down to what you're looking to go. The easiest and fastest way is to do the as is. But I used to use this term when I would talk to people about migrating physical to virtual. It is garbage in, garbage out. So if you have problems on your existing virtual machines, or the operating systems are really old, or the applications are really old, we're just bringing them over exactly the way they are. Build new is going to take longer. It's probably going to be more expensive. And there's more chances for troubleshooting. You're now migrating your files over, using some type of file server migration toolkit or something like that, which inevitably always forgets permissions on some files. And so it is going to be probably a little more challenging, more planning for sure. But once it's done, you're going to end up with a better product. Why consider Hyper-V? Hyper-V, when it first came out, was behind VMware pretty significantly, I think, in terms of features. I don't think that's the case now. I mean, the biggest features that people care about with VMware, were the ability to do vMotion. So, the migrate a VM from one host to the other without downtime. Hyper-V has that, and it was HA. A host dies, the VM startup on another host, almost instantaneously. Hyper-V has that with the Windows clustering. So it's the largest market share after VMware. It's been growing for a while. There's no additional cost for Hyper-V. It's literally just a role that you enable. It does support when it first came out, its support for guest OSs was pretty limited. It's not anymore. For the migration, it says it will require hardware. That's true, as we talked about earlier. However, if you have excess capacity in your existing VMware cluster, we might be able to do it without buying new hardware. First thing, we set up the new hardware. As I said, you may be able to do a rolling migration if you have excess capacity. And then some tools. So the three that I listed here are actually not, the one that I have been using the most lately is not on here. It's a product called Starwinds Converter. It's a free tool. It actually kind of works better than all of these. So that would be the tool, though these tools are fine. But there are, free tools out there. Most of the tools do require downtime for a VM migration. However, it is a VM by VM. So if I have 50 VMs, the whole process from start to finish might take, 2 weeks. But the only downtime is when I'm migrating a particular virtual machine. So you're not down for the whole 2 weeks. If I'm, migrating a 100 gig utility VM, then that VM I can migrate over in an hour. Its downtime for that VM is only an hour. So it's not all or nothing. Azure integration. So Microsoft is basically kind of trying to tie everything into Azure. So if you're running a newer version of Hyper-V or even just Windows in general, there's a lot of hooks into Azure already. So Azure Arc provides centralized management of the Hyper-V servers from the Azure portal. So that's essentially what Azure Arc is. It is managing, in this case, some on-prem stuff from the Azure portal. The benefit to doing this is going to be, kind of a single pane of glass for management. So if you see here, we've got some VMware, we've got some Hyper-V, we've got all kinds of other stuff, and we're doing some integration management from the Azure panel. Here we look at Azure Arc features. This is a Hyper-V server, and we now have the ability to do guest OS update from the Azure Arc management console. So basically hot patching. And you can now enable and turn on, so you're getting more visibility of your on-prem into Azure. And I think this is going to be a direction that Microsoft continues to go, to try to blur the lines between Azure and Hyper-V VMs. And does it really matter other than geographically where they're located, but in terms of management, let's just manage everything the same way. Azure Local is the next step in integration. So Azure Local is buying hardware packages. So, basically predefined SKUs, this one from Dell, this one for HPE, and it is running a Hyper-V hypervisor, but it looks like it is running as an Azure, just as basically a different Azure site. So it's basically seen, as I said, as a custom location in Azure. You can actually migrate your VMs from the Azure local, which is on-prem and hardware, up to Azure. You can actually migrate them back and forth. Obviously, you have to have some connectivity in place. It has to be very fast connectivity between there and Azure, but you do have the ability to do that. So Microsoft's really trying to blur the lines between on-prem and the cloud in terms of management and features. All right, I'm going to talk pretty quickly about HPE Private Cloud Business Edition. This is HPE's foray into let's see if we can get some Microsoft or some VMware, some of their market share. So HPE bought a company called Morpheus, and Morpheus is their answer to VMware. So Morpheus has been around for a long time. It is a full hypervisor, and then the HPE VM Essentials is the offering. So in the same way that ESXi is the hypervisor for VMware, Morpheus is the hypervisor for this HPE product, and then VM Essentials is kind of the whole product bundling of all the different services and technologies. And so you can manage, so HPE, again, because they're primarily a hardware company, although they're trying to be seen as more than that. So what they're trying to do is sell bundles, the distributed, the DHCI, where you buy this bundle. In this case, it's HPE Electra, which is the old Nimble SAN storage, or SimpliVity systems. And you can manage it all through the private cloud. However, you can also use this to manage VMware infrastructure as well. So again, kind of the same idea that Microsoft was going for, is let's be able to use the Azure management portal as a single pane of glass. HPE is doing the same thing here, where they're saying, hey, our management software can manage the VMware clusters, your vCenter clusters, as well as our HPE Morpheus VM Essentials, and we can handle that migration then because we can see both. We can be used to migrate from VMware to the Morpheus. So here's all that, and I'm not going to go through this, but this is kind of all the different components and terminology. So they have, as I said, the Morpheus is the hypervisor. Their VM Essentials Manager is basically the equivalent of vCenter. Their DSC Data Service Connector is what is tunneling information up to GreenLake, basically. So GreenLake is, kind of not VMware, HPE's hybrid cloud landing spot. They've kind of bet the future of their company on that, quite honestly, and it's very powerful what it can provide. So the DSC is what connects the on-prem up to GreenLake. It's a little prepackaged appliance. And that is all I have. I do just want to take one note. So the Morpheus VM Essentials has been out for a while. I think HPE bought them, I want to say over a year ago. And we've looked at them. Once Broadcom really upped the prices and started playing games with, how far can we take this? How much can we bleed our clients before they leave? We started looking at a whole bunch of different solutions. And I mean, we looked at solutions people never heard of. This one jumped out at us because obviously HPE, we've been partners with her forever. They make great products. But it had we have some kind of gating criteria, I guess, for lack of a better term. And one of them is, how do we back this up? Because if we can't use industry standard best practice backup software that we've been telling our customers and our clients, you should be running this stuff because it's the best. If this product doesn't work with that, we can't recommend it. And so when we initially looked at this, that was the case. We consider Veeam to be kind of the best backup software out there for virtual infrastructure. Barracuda is another, one that we strongly believe in, but Veeam's probably at the top of the list. And Veeam did not support this. The newest edition of Veeam, which came out, I want to say 3 months ago, maybe 4 months ago, does support the HP Morpheus VM Essentials. So that for us was a big game changer because it's like, okay, now we've got industry standard, top brand hardware support. We've got the backup support. HP's invested a ton into this. And the one thing I didn't talk about was cost, because the cost is somewhat fluid. So I didn't put specific pricing in here. But the cost of this GreenLake Essentials, VM Essentials software from HPE is a fraction of the cost of VMware. So the cost is basically back to what the vSphere Essentials Plus, which my guess is the vast majority of people listening to me ramble on right now, probably have been running or were running before it was taken away from them. That's what you're looking at in terms of cost. So it is a dramatic savings versus today's Broadcom's pricing. All right, anyways, that is all that I have. Chris, I don't know if there's any questions or anything like that you need me to attempt to answer.
No questions at this point. Obviously, lots of good information here. We'll just point folks to a couple resources that you may find valuable, and they'll be listed in the evaluation that you're going to get. There's going to be kind of a free planning or whiteboard session looking at what alternatives might make sense for your organization. So you can sit down with Dennis and do that whiteboard. So what do you have? Where do you want to go? What makes sense? You may just want additional information on Hyper-V or Azure Local, Azure Cloud, or the HPE VMware Essentials. You can ask for that. And of course, you may have some interest in Microsoft training. So all those are listed as other resources, or you can just let us know what you need, and we'll be happy to help you out with that. So with that, I want to say thank you very much to Dennis. Thanks to each of you. I hope the information was good. and have a great rest of the day. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye-bye.